Guys. Mike Lowernstern was wrong. On the internet. G'day and welcome back to the A to Z of Clarinet. My name is Philip and we have reached O, and O is for oiling and maintenance. Yeah, I know they're getting a little bit obscure, but what else starts with O? Embouchure? Oiling is a crucial part of taking care of a wooden clarinet. If your clarinet is made of wood, you should be oiling your clarinet. Especially at this time of year. This is January. In the Northern Hemisphere, of course, it is freezing cold in most places. And where I live, in Wajak Noongar Buja, Perth, Western Australia, it is the season of Birak, which is hotter than the very fires of Hades. Most days it's up around 40 degrees Celsius with 0% humidity. My instrument does not like that. So oiling is important, but there's a lot of misunderstanding around why we oil our clarinets. And this is why I'm picking on Mike. Mike Lowernstern from earspasm.com and the Earspasm YouTube channel put up a video a couple of years ago testing the theory of whether oiling is good for your clarinet. Now, the conclusion Mike got to was that if your teacher tells you to oil your clarinet, you should. That is correct. Now, Mike also said that he doesn't oil his clarinet, but he makes sure to keep his instruments at a constant temperature and a constant or consistent humidity. Overly dramatic introduction aside, Mike Lowernstern is a very dear friend of mine. Mike was my teacher for a couple of years, several years ago, and he's been my mentor for, well, at least a couple of decades now. In fact, Mike even came to Perth to visit me a few years ago. Boy, what a great time we had. We work together, we speak often, we're very close, so please don't take this as a hate-filled rant. But he's totally wrong. And he's not just wrong about whether or not you should oil your clarinet, he was wrong about how he went about testing his hypothesis. In the video, Mike was, very badly, testing the assumption that the oil seeps into the wood of the clarinet. What he did was he got a wooden barrel off eBay, a cheap one, and soaked it in paraffin oil for something like 7 months, and then cut it in half to look and see if the oil had seeped in. Here's my problem with that. Firstly, you would not see the oil seeping into the wood. You would not see any evidence of that because that's not how oil works. The other thing is that that's not what oiling a clarinet does. We don't soak the instrument with oil so that it stays moist and doesn't crack. I'm going to look at the assumptions that I think went behind Lowenstern's experiment, and I'm going to challenge each of those assumptions and give you something to think about. Assumption number one is that the wood shouldn't dry out. The implication that Lowenstern made was that the oil will help keep the wood moist. Now, we don't want the instrument to be moist. I gotta stop saying moist. Wood needs to be dry. In order to build an instrument out of it, it needs to be properly seasoned over several years so that the wood is at the optimal low moisture level. If we were to make an instrument out of wood that still has too much moisture in it, as the wood dries out, over the period of, say, a couple of months, the instrument would become unplayable because wood moves. Now, there's nothing we can do to prevent that wood movement. That is just something that wood does. So, the wood needs to be dry. So, why do we oil it? The second assumption is that the oil seeps into the wood. The process of oiling a clarinet is what woodworkers refer to as finishing. Another one of my hobbies, other than ironing, is woodworking. I love making things out of wood, especially wood turning. What finishing does is to put a layer, a protective layer over the wood to help keep the elements out of the wood. What that means is we use some kind of substance to create a layer of protection on top of the wood, not inside the wood. And there are different kinds of finishes. Now, at the risk of turning this into a woodworking channel, maybe it should be a woodworking channel, I'm going to talk about the different kinds of finishes that we have, and that might help you understand why we need to oil our clarinet. First of all, we have what we call varnish. Now, many different things are called varnish, but basically what varnish is is some solid particles suspended in some kind of solvent that is painted onto the wood. The solvent flashes off, and we're left with the solids creating a film over the top of the piece of wood. Tables, chairs, boxes are often varnished because it looks nice and shiny. We get a nice sort of film finish over the top of the wood. Varnish tends to be somewhat flexible, and it's fairly resistant to, knocks and dings and scratches and abrasion. As the wood moves, for example, in a big tabletop, that moves with the seasons, the varnish will be flexible enough to kind of go with the wood movement. Varnish is fairly cheap to buy, it's easy to apply, and it's easy to fix if you've got a sander. Then we have good old shellac. Shellac is a gorgeous product. Back in the old days, it was kind of like a varnish that was made from the shell of the lac beetle, but these days it's made from tree sap and other natural compounds. You buy it in a flaky form, which you then dissolve in alcohol, and then you apply it very easily with a rag or with a brush or with a sponge or something like that. It dries very quickly, so it's very easy to apply, and it's very easy to repair. The only problem with shellac is that it doesn't deal well with rapid temperature changes. If it gets very cold or if it gets very hot, the finish can melt, or it can freeze and actually, crack and even shatter. If you were to look very carefully at the surface of my wife's double bass over here, you will notice that there's a very fine sort of crazed pattern. That's from about 20 years ago when we took the double bass to London and it went in the undercarriage of the aeroplane and the temperature got so low that the finish shattered. And finally, we have oil finishes or wax finishes. Oil is very easy to apply. In fact, for some pieces like cutting boards and things like that, some people just dunk their wooden item into a vat of oil and that's their finishing done. It really adds a warmth to the wood. It looks very appealing. It doesn't have much of a sheen to it, but it's very easy to reapply. The thing it's not good at, though, is abrasion resistance. It wears off very quickly, but that's okay because you can just paint more on. Actually, I've got a couple of things here I can show you. This pencil cup is made of Jarrah, and this was Varnish. Now, it's got a lot of dust on it, so you don't see the shine quite as much, but you'll notice it sort of has that, not quite plasticky, but it's got a bright, shimmery kind of finish on it. The handle of this conducting baton that I made has actually got a finish that is made from super glue. Now that kind of mimics what an epoxy finish is like. It's very, very hard. It's very, very resistant to abrasion, and it's very, very shiny. Here we have a baton handle that's finished with oil. You'll notice that it doesn't shine like the others do, but there's a warmth about it, and it kind of makes you want to hold it. You just kind of want to touch something that's been finished with oil. And now this candle votive. This is a nice piece of West Australian she oak, and this was finished with. This is a mixture of shellac and wax. So this was shellacked and then buffed out with wax. Again, it's got that warmth that you get with oil, but it doesn't really need abrasion resistance because it just kind of sits on the mantelpiece when you want to light a candle. So we have different finishes for different applications. Why do we use oil on a clarinet? Well, the wood is going to want to move a little bit, so it's not good to have a hard finish. So varnish, shellac, epoxy are out of the question. Basically, that leaves us with an oil finish. Now, what does the finish do? We're not too worried about scratches and dings on a clarinet because generally we're going to be pretty careful. So the oil, the reason for putting that protective layer on the outside of the instrument is to protect it from the elements. So here's where the misunderstanding happens. We don't oil our clarinet so that the oil seeps into the wood and keeps the wood moist. No, we want to keep the wood dry. So the oil keeps a barrier between the outside air and also the moisture that gets on the inside of the instrument and stops that from seeping into the wood. Now let's talk about that idea of oil soaking into the wood for a second. Wood, as you know, being a natural fiber or being from a tree, it's basically made up of parallel fibers which are like little tubes that send water to the top of the plant and then back down again. Yes, in my reed video, I talked about them being called xylems and phloem, and I used the words incorrectly. Thank you, Kieran. Yes, the phloem is actually kind of attached to the xylem and it's part of it, and the other stuff is other things. Let's not get into that right now. But if we visualize a piece of wood as like basically kind of what it is, a bundle of straws or a bundle of tubes, Have a look at that. Have a look at that construction. So you can well imagine that oil or any kind of material, whether it's a liquid or even just the air, is going to go into this end grain. We call the direction of the fibers the grain. The end grain is going to soak up a lot of whatever you throw at it. The side grain is not going to get anywhere near as much. Yes, of course, there are little fissures and little cracks that we can get between those fibers, but that's nothing compared to how much oil soaks in this way. So, on your barrel, Mike, no, of course it didn't seep in that way, but it did seep in that way. And even so, it's on a microscopic level. You would not be able to see it with the naked eye. So if the oil doesn't seep in, why do we need that protective layer if the water and the air is not going to seep into the instrument as well? Well, what it does is it makes the instrument more resistant to rapid changes in humidity and temperature. This is what Michael got right in his video. We want to protect the instrument from rapid changes of temperature and humidity. If we let the surface of our clarinet dry out of oil, or the oil kind of wears off, then we are leaving ourselves open to rapid humidity changes. So, should you oil your clarinet? Yes, you should. You should oil your clarinet. Now, if you want to get really old school about it, you can oil your clarinet the way I oiled my clarinet. If you're lucky like me and you knew your grandfather, maybe he said something about oiling an old axe handle. Now, what you would do if you just fit your axe with a new handle is you would give it a date with good old linseed oil or linseed oil. And you would oil it, as my grandfather would say, once a day for a week, once a week for a month, once a month for a year, and then every year thereafter. Now, when your instrument came from the factory, they'd already put several coats of oil on it, so you only need to do it maybe once every couple of months in your first year of ownership, and then every year thereafter. So you take an oiled swab, not your regular swab, a different swab with oil on it, and you run it through your bore a couple of times, and you're all oiled. If you want to oil the outside as well to make it look nice, you can do that as well. Take that same swab and just rub it over the areas, but stay away from the pads. If you get that oil on the pads or on the keywork, it can cause all sorts of problems. And there you have it. That's all you need to do. Do that once every 6 months if your instrument's new, or once every year. Now, just revisiting the main point, and it's the main point from Michael's video as well. Protect your instrument from rapid changes of temperature and humidity. Oiling your clarinet will give you an extra layer of protection, but it's up to you to make sure your instrument is protected from rapid temperature and humidity changes. So that's it for today. No, I didn't get to play, and no, I probably didn't give you much practical advice on playing the instrument, but it is important. It is important to talk about maintenance and making sure you take good care of your instrument. Q is coming up in a couple of weeks, and that is going to be a Q&A. So if you follow that link down below, you can sign up for my mailing list, and that's where I'm going to be asking you to provide me with some questions that I can answer in my Q video. I've already got a couple of really good ones, so I think it's going to be a fun episode. And finally, Michael, I'm sorry. I know you had the best of intentions, but your experiment was terrible. At least your heart was in the right place. Thank you all so much for watching. Thanks for allowing me to nerd out a little bit about looking after our instruments. I look forward to seeing you next time for P. Oh man, that's going to be a good one. Take care, and I'll see you soon.